When it comes to serial killers, one of the first questions that pop into most people's minds is, how many people did they kill? It's as if the number of victims has a direct correlation with how evil the killer is. Well, going by that reasoning, who I'm going to talk about would be considered the most evil serial killer in American history. July 15, 1982. Two children, while playing near the Green River, stumble upon the body of 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield. She was strangled and found floating in the river. Within the next few weeks, 4 more bodies were found, all of them in or right next to the Green River. Deborah Lynn Bonner, Marcia Faye Chapman, Cynthia Jean Hines, and Opal Charmaine Mills. Sadly, that was just the beginning. As of right now, Gary Ridgway has a confirmed body count of 49. That's right, 49. He has the highest confirmed body count of any serial killer in American history. He has confessed to 71 murders, but the police believe that number to be more likely in the 90s. Ridgway has himself admitted that he can't even remember how many women he has killed. All of Ridgway's victims were between ages 14 to 38 and were believed to be runaways and prostitutes. Their bodies had been found scattered all over the King County, Washington area. SeaTac Airport, Highway 410 and along Highway I-90, but it's the location of where the first few victims were found that gave him his nickname, the Green River Killer. Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, and according to some of his relatives, his home life was far from normal. He had a bedwetting problem which lasted into his teens, and his mother made it a rule to always belittle him in front of the rest of the family each time it happened. Ridgway would later confide in psychologists and admit that he had a sexual attraction towards his mother, and that he would often fantasize about killing her. His father was a bus driver and would loudly complain about prostitutes in front of Ridgway. In high school, Ridgway's IQ was in the low 80s, and he was found to be dyslexic. When he was 16, he lured a 6-year-old boy in the woods, and then stabbed him. The young boy survived the attack, and both he and Ridgway admit that Ridgway said, "I always wondered what it would be like to kill someone." After high school, he married Claudia Barrows in 1970. He then joined the Navy and was shipped to the Vietnam War. While there, he spent quite a bit of time with prostitutes, and because of all those sexual adventures, contracted gonorrhea in the process. Claudia was unfaithful as well, and their marriage ended soon after. Ridgway then became extremely religious, yet he still found himself drawn to prostitutes. Ridgway would demand Marcia Winslow, his now second wife, to have sex in a public place. Some of these areas turned out to be where his future victims would later be found. In 1975, they would have a son, Matthew. He would show pictures of his son to his unsuspecting victims to get the women to drop their guard. On one occasion, he took his son to the location of where he left one of his victims. With his son fast asleep in the truck roughly 30 feet away, he had sex with the body. Another time, Ridgway admits to driving his truck with a woman and his son. He left his son in the truck and walked into the forest with the woman. There, he would rape her and kill her. When he got back to the vehicle, he told his son that the woman decided to walk home. In 1981, the marriage between Gary and Marcia would also end in divorce. And just like his previous marriage, they were both unfaithful to one another. In 1982, Ridgway was arrested as he was caught with a prostitute in his truck. Ridgway became a suspect in the murders in 1983. He volunteered to take a polygraph and passed. The police took some hair and saliva samples and let Ridgway go. Robert Keppel and Dave Reichart, two members of the Green River Murders Task Force, were interviewing serial killer Ted Bundy. In one of these interviews, Bundy had suggested that the person responsible for the murders would probably revisit the sites where he left the bodies to have sex with them. He was right. In the meantime, Ridgway continued killing.
This is being described as one of the nastiest homicides in King County record. 25 detectives have been assigned to the case full-time, making this one of the largest investigations in the county's history.
Then in 1985, he met Judith Lynch. And 3 years later, they were married. It was at this time the killings slowed down considerably. Of the 49 victims Ridgway was charged with killing, only 3 of them were murdered after he met Judith. Ridgway was arrested on November 30th, 2001. He was working at a Kenworth truck factory, and the police were able to get DNA evidence linking Ridgway to the murders of 4 women found in the Green River nearly 20 years ago. He confessed to the murders.
And Mr. Ridgway, is it your desire to plead guilty to the 48 charges of aggravated murder in the first degree because you believe that you are guilty of each of those offenses?
Yes.
For the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield.
Guilty.
For the death of Colleen R. Brockman.
Guilty.
For the death of Yvonne S. Antosh.
Guilty.
For the death of Patricia M. Barzak.
Guilty.
And even told the police that he thought he was doing them a favor.
But I thought I was doing you guys a favor. Killing prostitutes here, you guys can't control them, but I can.
Cold and unfeeling, Ridgway would divulge in great detail all the horrible things he had done, just as calmly as if he were discussing the weather.
And I choked her to death. Then I took my socks off and got them in a knot and tied them around her neck. And
initially, he was to get the death penalty, but in 2003, a deal was made where Ridgway would take the police to the locations of his victims and plead guilty to, at that time, the 48 murders. And in return, he'd get life in prison. Taking Ridgway along to help show where the victims were located was troublesome for many. On one hand, you have the families and friends of the deceased, who are now able to put their loved ones to rest. Yet on the other hand, Ridgway was able to revisit his crime scenes and acquire himself yet again another mental trophy. However, it was quite obvious that Ridgway enjoyed these trips. In some instances, he would go out searching for the remains of his victims, and he would suddenly have no idea where they are.
Well, I thought it was up there I dropped her. I didn't remember being back here, because it's more logical.
The police started to believe it was a tactic he was using to be let out of his cell. They were not impressed.
What do we got? A stupid Gary for this one, or what's the deal here?
Here, Ridgway's all ready to go, but a detective, angry that he's been misled, abruptly cancels the trip.
You're not going anywhere. Take your ass back to the cell, and when you want to start telling the truth, you let us know.
In the courtroom, the family members of all the people he killed took turns to confront Ridgway, during which he showed little to no emotion or empathy whatsoever.
She was a wife, she was a sister, and we miss her.
He's an animal. I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death.
He broke down, however, when the father of one of his victims forgave him.
Mr. Ridgway, there are people here that hate you. I'm not one of them. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. You are forgiven, sir.
Rebecca Romero, who went missing back in 1982. Her remains were found in 2011, and she now became Ridgway's 49th confirmed kill. In 2013, Ridgway did a series of interviews with Charlie Harger from Como News. Ridgway states that he knows there are more of his victims out there. Ridgway told Harger that when he was with the police to look for the remains of his victims, they would rarely let him leave the vehicle, so it was difficult to pinpoint the exact locations. According to Harger, Ridgway has the ability to describe a victim's head falling off a decomposing body, like he's describing taking his dog for a walk. It is quite possible that Ridgway was just looking for a way to gain more infamy as a serial killer. If that's the case, then he is as sick and evil as they come. Or he isn't lying, and there are several more bodies of poor women who have yet to be found. In 2014, Ridgway was transferred to Colorado prison.
The man who put Gary Ridgway, the most prolific serial killer in history, away for life is livid over what he describes as a prison upgrade for the Green River Killer.
For crying out loud, he killed 51 people for certain.
Ridgway, the same man who confessed to killing 49 women in our state, is now serving time in Colorado. His first victim was pulled from the Green River in 1982. Representative Dave Reichert says the Green River Killer went from virtual isolation in the Washington pen to the opportunity of mingling with the general population in a Colorado prison on the taxpayer's dime. Reichert not only objects, but he calls it an insult to the families of those victims.
If there should be anyone who is left in his cell for the rest of his life because he did escape the death penalty, it should be Ridgway.
But due to an overwhelming outcry from the victim's family, he was transferred back to the Washington State Pen. Here he will remain, to live out the rest of his days in solitary confinement, which in my opinion is far better than he deserves. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and then subscribe. Once again, my name is Rick, and I'll see you next time on Dissecting Murder.